Hey everybody, this is Kevin Ring, president of FAM. We're back with another heart-to-heart series discussion. Today I'm really glad to have Mario Garcia and Damian Lewis, who are going to talk to us about federal compassionate release, FAM's clearinghouse, along with the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, the Washington Lawyers Committee, and the work we're doing to try to match people in federal prison with pro bono attorneys to try to take advantage of compassionate release to get them out of harm's way from COVID spreading in the federal prisons. Really excited to hear from Damien as he was recently released, and from Mario because he's one of the lawyers who has really ridden to the sound of gunfire and just helped give his time and talent to try to help people. And we couldn't do this without them. All we're doing is playing matchmaker and trying to find people, qualified attorneys, and he's one of the best, and we're grateful for him doing this and for sharing his experiences with us. Last week when we talked, I took a minute because I wanted to talk about Andrea Circlebear, the woman who died in prison of COVID after delivering her baby, the 30-year-old Native American woman. And how outrageous that was. And we called for an investigation. And I just ask that you indulge me for a minute because there's another news story that's hitting today when we're about to talk that I think is going to be in the news for a while. And that's this Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, who was an African-American man who was shot and killed by a white man and his father. And, I don't think anybody doesn't think this country is past racism and that racist incidents like this are going to occur. But the troubling thing here, once again, is the lack of enforcement. And when I look at these issues and I see it discussed in our Facebook group among families who come from all backgrounds, and race can still be a difficult issue to talk about. And I understand that. As somebody who went to federal prison as a white person, I saw things that, I wouldn't have experienced, but for having had that experience and seeing the different paths that people take to wind up in trouble. But one thing I don't want to be is a hypocrite. And so a lot of times when I look at these situations, I just think, what if that happened to me? Or what if that was my family? Those are the questions we ask lawmakers when we work with FAM's families and we try to talk about your loved ones' cases, is to put yourself in their shoes. And if they were being treated this way in prison, or if they were being treated this way by prosecutors, what would you think if that was your family? And we ask the same of lawmakers. And I do the same thing when it comes to race. I don't think race is the answer to every question in criminal justice, but I do want to say that when I look at a case like this, I think, what if that had been me or somebody, a friend of mine that looked like me? And all I can say is there's just no way that that case would have been handled the same way. It is just impossible to think that as a white man jogging down the street, that if I had been shot that way, there would have been no grand jury meeting against the people who had done that to me, especially if it had been a black man who had shot me. There would have been no investigation, no grand jury, no prosecutor would have recused himself and written a letter saying that I had a history that maybe made me susceptible to being violent in this incident, and so therefore I was at fault. And so, working in criminal justice issues, I don't want to prejudge the outcome of this. These guys are entitled to the presumption of innocence, like everybody is. But I just want to say that there's always talk about how race permeates our system, and it's omnipresent. I just know as somebody who was prosecuted that at every step of the system, I benefited from being white. And I didn't mean my journey was easy, and I complained a lot about it, and it was hell on my family. But I knew that there was a different standard for me. And whether that was intentional or not, and whether the actors were racist or not, it didn't really matter, and it doesn't matter. What matters is there was a different system. And we're seeing it again here in the fact that they did not even prosecute or think about prosecuting until this video came out. And now everyone's on board. So that's a problem. And I just think we have to own that and come to grips with that. And the reason why it's so important is not because maybe a couple racist people did a racist thing, but because when the police get involved and they don't seem like they're being fair actors, that erodes trust in the system. So for all of us who care about public safety, regardless of our color or background, We need trust between communities and the police. And when communities of color see this happen, they are absolutely justified in thinking that they're treated differently and worse. And so that's a problem for all of us. And so I just want to say that I don't really think there's anybody on the other side, but there are so many times where we talk about how does race, come into the system, and it's hard to measure it because we say, oh, I don't know if that sentence would have been longer or shorter if that person had been Black. All I would ask you is to say, what if it were you or your family member? And I just want to say, there is no doubt in my mind that if I had been jogging and I had been shot by 2 Black people, that they would have gotten scrutiny. And that didn't happen here is a problem. So I just want to say that. I don't want to moralize about it. I just want to acknowledge that because it's in the news today. I'm happy to say, though, that we're going to move on to talk about federal compassionate release, because I know you guys have a lot of questions about that. There's still confusion about compassionate release versus home confinement, and we'll get into that. But I want to start with good news, because a lot of you are seeking to get your loved ones out of harm's way. And we have somebody here who got out. And he's only been out 2 weeks. And so we're incredibly grateful that Damien has agreed to join us. He's got his Zoom tutorial. He knows what he's doing. We did our prep. So I'm going to ask him to unmute his mic, and I want to ask him, Damien, you've been home 2 weeks. You got compassionate release. Can you tell us a little bit about that process? And first, how does it feel to be home?
It feels good to be home. The process, the course happens time, probably with the virus that's going on, it probably took a little longer, but it did go kind of fast for when it first hit, and everybody was like, oh, well, we don't know, the course was closed, and yes, I received all kind of mail from them, but I kept in contact with Fam and NACDL, the lawyer, and they just pulled it up for me.
What can you tell people, and you may have to speak up just a little bit, what facility were you in? What prison were you in?
I was in Fort Worth Medical Center in Texas. I had 60 months. But thanks be to God, he let me out early.
And if I understand it correctly, what conditions did you have that made you worried about the spread of COVID in there? Is when you first got there, were you already suffering something that made you worried about catching this?
I was on 24 hours of oxygen already, but the whole time I was there, my health started deteriorating because the nursing care there isn't right. They don't do their job, and they think you're just a paycheck. Like one of them told me, they just come there to get a paycheck. Everything else is irrelevant.
Hey, Damien, you've got to be mistaken, because the Attorney General said that a federal prison is the safest place to be right now. What do you say?
I heard that too. They said, before I come home, they told me the safest place. I was in the safest place.
Yeah.
And I said, now what was going on in here? Because that prison right there, they're running with it like a chicken with their head cut off. They don't know what to do. And they mixing all these guys in together with the positive and negative. So they don't know who really gonna have it after a second.
Yeah, we talked a minute before, and I think you might, well, no, you were still there. So you got home 2 weeks ago, right?
Yes, sir.
And was the outbreak, there's been a lot more positive tests. Had they been doing testing when you were there or no?
Yeah, I actually got tested before I left. I was negative. They came back 24 hours later and did it, but I had ended up getting released.
Okay. And I want to talk just a little bit about that process. So my understanding is that you filed pro se, meaning yourself. You sought compassionate release. Right. And what happened at first?
The courts was just dragging me through the process. It was waiting on the attorney for one until I got pro bono from Fam, from y'all. And it just went from there.
And did the Bureau support your request for compassionate release, or did they oppose it?
Well, this is the crazy thing, okay? The warden, he approved the compassionate release, but it was also saying he denied it because he said I was able to ambulate around the prison, which I really was limited. I wasn't actually just going around the whole facility. I was in the nursing care part. So they bring you your food, they do this, they do that for you. It's not like I was able, but they had kind of denied me. So that's the reason I had to go into the court for my compassionate release. And when they got to the court, it was just another long, slow dragging process.
Did you know anybody there? I mean, I think they've had some deaths at Fort Worth. Did you know of anybody who was ill?
Yeah, I know a couple of guys before I left that tested positive. Before I left, they had 2 guys die. And like I said, I've seen on the website the other day, yesterday, that a guy I knew, Donnie Grosvenor, had died. And I mean, it's just crazy up there.
A lot of our families, when the folks are inside, they seek compassionate release, and it's hard, especially if somebody's compromised health-wise. I mean,
Right.
you seem, even with your illness, you seem like you could have been an advocate for yourself, but some people aren't in that position. So when we helped pass the First Step Act and pass the reforms to the compassion release program, we wanted families to be able to seek compassion release on behalf of their loved ones. So a lot of the families who are watching did that. Did you have someone on the outside helping you?
Yeah, my girlfriend Vanessa Taylor was helping me, and she's the way I ended up talking to Fam to y'all.
Okay.
But
Well, so let's give Vanessa a shout out.
Yeah, she's right there.
All right, Vanessa.
As far as anyone helping me, I did it myself, actually.
That's just like a man, right? Vanessa says he did it himself. Anyway, we're glad you're home. And I'm sure people are going to have some questions for you, because people are looking for hope, and knowing that this, this home confinement thing has been a disaster, where they've given it to people and they take, oh, did you see that? Did you see people who had been approved for home confinement and then, taken it away from them? Or what was the home confinement process as you understood it at Fort Worth?
I really can't tell you, because they wasn't letting anyone out. So I didn't really know anyone who did get out. But I did hear one story say a warden had stopped one guy when he was getting out, saying he couldn't get out. But as far as
were other people seeking compassionate release where you were, or no?
Yeah, they had a bunch of guys there seeking it. I think it was like, before I left, they said 4 people had went home before me.
Gotcha.
Compassionate release.
That's good. And so the warden in your case, which is a little bit unusual, so the warden did support your compassionate release?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's good. I don't think people realize, I mean, if the wardens would do that more often, we could get people out. The problem is, a lot of times BOP and the Justice Department fight these motions. So if they would be supportive, that would be a lot easier on all of us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
well,
sir.
I'm going to ask Mario, because you're helping in these cases mostly where you're probably seeing the Justice Department and Bureau of Prisons oppose these motions. But let me first start, as I try to do, by saying, asking you to just give a little bit of background on yourself, because not everybody cares about these issues. These families are dealing with these things firsthand, so I know why they care. How did you get involved in this issue? Why do you care about criminal justice reform and becoming a lawyer, even working on this?
Well, thanks, Kevin, and everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been practicing over 20 years, and the majority of that time in federal court. Slowly, as I've kind of built up my knowledge and experience, my practice in federal courts expanded. I volunteer on our reentry court. We're fortunate enough to have a fantastic reentry court where guys and gals can come in and earn some time off their supervised release time by engaging in some really positive rehabilitation. And I've also been a CJA lawyer for the better part of a decade or so. And
no acronyms. Explain what CJ is.
Sure. So I'm a private attorney. In fact, I manage our practice. It's a practice of 4 attorneys, paralegals, and law clerks. But in addition to my private practice, where I take a paid case, I'm also on a panel of attorneys, or a group of attorneys, who have to apply and be qualified by the court to serve as essentially public defenders. We're private attorneys. We're paid by the court. We're not paid by the prosecutor. We're paid by the court, and we're selected to take on these cases based on our knowledge and our skill and our advocacy. And we, in addition to the federal public defender's office in our district, are very active. The majority of us are working anywhere from 6 to 12 cases at a time. So we're very involved. We're very well known to the court, and we take our jobs very seriously. So that's what we call CJA lawyers.
I want to, first of all, I got to mention this because I get fed the questions and we'll get to them. But Damien, first of all, I just want you to know everybody is writing and saying congratulations to you on being home. And so
Thank you.
everyone's excited for you. Mario, let's jump in a little bit to, so when FAM and NACDL and the Washington Lawyers Committee started this project, we had been working on compassionate release before this, but when COVID started, we thought, the political branches, Congress, the president, they may not use their authority to get people out. But, if this got as bad as we thought it might, the courts may step in and help people get out because they don't want to be a party to this. They did not sentence people to die, and so they may be inclined to support releases. But when we saw this, we approached it as almost like, like the Titanic, and it's like women and children first. So our focus was, people who were vulnerable, people who were compromised, like Damien's health is with the COPD and the rest, the people who, normally should get this anyway, but COVID posed a particular risk. And I know there have been people who have applied, outside of that, but what we also knew was that the best chance was to have a lawyer represent people. And, so we put out a call. We have attorneys across the country who have helped at private firms and the federal defenders. And I know that people are getting matched with lawyers and they're saying, well, the defenders, the public defender, they didn't do a great job for me or whatever. And my experience has been, these are the street fighters you want in something like this, because they know the law inside and out, and they've worked on a lot of these cases. And so what has your experience been in that, in terms of, of working on these cases? Like, what's effective and who's effective in this fight?
Great question. So obviously, and you've mentioned a number of the players, but everyone involved in this process includes the U.S. Attorney, the court, the probation department, the unit team in the prison. And so you don't want to walk into that mix not having experience or having practice or built relationships with those people. And let me give you an example. We were having difficulty getting reports, what are called PR-15 or administrative remedy records from the prisons. They were asking us to file subpoenas. They're asking us to file FOIA requests. They're asking us to have inmate authorization signed, and it was dragging the process unnecessarily down. So we reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office here and said, hey, you guys have access to this with your contacts at BOP Legal. Can you get us these informally? It's an informal discovery request. And we had also considered filing motions with the court, but our district in particular is under somewhat of a judicial emergency. So I thought there's got to be a way that we can work this out informally. So reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and to their credit, they said, yes, we can provide those. And generally within about 24 or 48 hours of requesting these necessary records, we're getting them. So, if you just had another attorney who maybe wasn't familiar to the U.S. Attorney's Office, they might not have the mutual respect or credibility or ability to just make that connection and make that request. So whether it's an assistant federal public defender who is day in and day out in the trenches, or a CJA lawyer, they're going to be your best advocates in this situation.
What goes into this now? Okay, so I know at FAM, and people were asking about the process, because we've had people through Core Links fill out the questionnaire in federal prison, so that's how we heard about it. Other times it's a loved one filling out our questionnaire on our webpage. Sometimes it's both. And then, we send it to a very, sort of not a superficial, but not a very deep screen process, because we want to try to include as many people as possible. And then we try to farm those cases out. Now, some people we can knock off early because they don't even come close to the criteria that we know the court's going to look at. I mean, we're going to mostly leave that decision to the attorneys who do the deeper dive, but there's some people who just don't have any of this sort of hallmarks of what's going to be sought in a compassionate release case. What do you do when you get a case? What are you looking for? How do you go to battle? What do you need to go to make the best pitch to a judge?
Well, let's break that into a couple different sections there. So the first thing is, when a referral comes across my desk, I look at it and I say, is this a medical request, a COVID or a terminal illness, something along those lines, Or is this more of a legal or a fairness request? You've got guys who've been sentenced under the 924C statute, which is the gun statute in connection with a robbery, where before they were getting stacked sentences of 25 years after the first offense.
Mhm.
Now they're only getting 7, so or less. But so we kind of look at an initial question: are these medical or are these legal? The medical ones are kind of taking priority only because obviously we don't want someone to suffer unnecessarily if they don't need to in prison, and get better care out. So we look at that and we start figuring out where they're at in the administrative process. Absolutely, an individual has to file a request with the warden. It's my understanding every district and every prison is treating this a little differently. So please take my comments and my thoughts from the 10,000-foot level. But regardless, they have to put in a request for a reduction in sentence for a medical condition or a dependent care situation. So maybe their spouse has died and there's no one to take care of their dependents. So maybe they're asking you to get out that way. But regardless,
can I ask you, can I just stop you right there for 1 second? Just because people even ask that question. What form does that request have to take? Do they have to fill out a BP-9 or is there a form, or is it just a letter from home? What is the request?
Yeah, so again, my understanding is most are accepting any type of writing, whether it's email, written. Yes. The one thing I can stress is make a copy, document if you can, even if you have to take a picture of it or a screenshot, whatever it is, because they're not all getting entered into the BOP system, the Century system. So then they're having to track down where these are at. Are they on a desk somewhere? They're in an inbox somewhere. So put in the request. I'm sending my clients a form that's a request for administrative remedy. They're filing that. And then if they're denied, we're putting in a BP-9 to the warden, which is a request for reconsideration from an administrative decision. And then if they're denied, they file a BP-10 to the regional office. And if they're denied there, then they file a BP-11 to the central office. But those steps aren't.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that. I want to ask you about that process. But first, hey, Damien, how did you file?
I just sent a letter to the warden, and that was basically it. And then it went to the region after the warden, and then to the courts.
Did you say anything about, did you just say, I'm ill and at risk, or did you say, and I have a home to go to? Did you mention anything about anything else?
No, sir. See, actually, I had filed my compassionate release way last year. And it was, like I said, it was granted through the warden, but he also denied it. It was approved. It was circled approved on there. And they kicked it to the region because, like I said, they said I can ambulate.
Yeah.
And plus, I have a 924C charge.
Okay.
So that was kind of like the process. They didn't want to deal with that, so they tried to let the courts decide if they wanted to let me go on.
Gotcha. Yeah. And Mario, this is a question we're getting a lot of, which is 30 days. What does that 30 days mean? And does everybody have to go through BP-9, 10 all the way up? Or how you what advice? And I know it's different in different regions, I think, right now.
Yeah, different in different regions. Without a doubt, pursue every remedy that you can. If you look at the statute and if you look at the BOP's program statement, it says that it's whichever is earlier, either exhausting your administrative remedies or 30 days have passed since you submitted it to the warden. So on that 31st day, regardless of whether you've received a denial or not, in some districts, and this is evolving, you can go to court.
Right.
In addition to that, some districts are waiving the 30-day requirement, finding that exhaustion is not even necessary based on the compelling extraordinary circumstances. So the best thing I can tell you in that situation is reach out to your federal public defender's office, or reach out if you're appointed an attorney to find out where your district is falling in those different options.
Where are you, in your practice, what are you seeing judges demand in that regard?
Certainly having to file and certainly having to wait 30 days. Just today, I got an acknowledgement that after the 30th day from when it's submitted, that our clients can file with the court. That's a change. So, again, every district, even in Indiana, the Northern District may be treating it differently than the Southern District. Every district is kind of treating these a little bit differently.
I think Damien's situation, my father passed away, he had COPD though. And so I think, that's a case to me that's pretty clear that, he would have been hit hard by COVID. I mean, there's just no question about that. And so I'm glad they saw that. But what are you seeing in terms of conditions that, rise to the level that, I've seen judges say, look, having asthma alone, if it's not that bad, that's not going to be, that's not a get out of jail free card, for instance. And so we need more than that. So I'm going to ask you two questions, actually. One, what do you see in terms of like medical need? And I understand that that'll change from judge to judge. But then two, besides the medical need issue, what are the other factors that the judges are going to consider when they consider the motion?
Sure. Sickle cell anemia, diabetes, COPD, cancer. Those are all kind of the ones that we're seeing the most of and are requiring some of the most urgent responses, COPD. From there, the other factors that you have to consider are the fact that it's not just that you establish that there may be a compelling or extraordinary circumstance as to why you should be let out. Let's say you have less than a year on your sentence. You don't really have any of those major medical conditions, but your facility has a number of deaths or positive tests. It's a hotspot. I think there's a push to try and get as many people out who are already going to be out anyway in as little as 12 months. So, I mean, I think those may fall into that category as well as being a little bit more priority or rising to the top. But the other thing people have to remember is that it's not just showing that there's an extraordinary situation, but they have to then have a reentry plan. And they also have to have established to a judge that under the 3553A factors, those are those sentencing factors that guys are being sentenced under, that those factors are reevaluated now as the court decides whether or not they should grant a release. So it's not just that somebody has asthma or diabetes or cancer, but it's, do they have a reentry plan that the probation department may look at and do a home inspection on? And then do they have established 3553A factors that warrant a reduction in sentence?
Well, and I want to mention this because unlike with home confinement and with the elderly offender home detention program, which is another separate program, compassionate release is not, you're not limited based on your offense. Isn't that correct? That, and Damien mentioned that he had a 924C, the home confinement is really, the Attorney General and the wardens are really limiting it to those who had no violence in their record, not only in their current offense, but in their prior offenses. But compassionate release is available regardless of offense. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We've seen in other districts 924C sentences that were incredibly long, which now would not be as long, reduced to time served. We've seen career offender guideline enhancements where someone maybe had a couple prior felonies for marijuana or another substance maybe is legal now, where we've had district court judges remove those career offender enhancements and then enter a time served sentence based on the new guideline range. We're also seeing challenges to 851 enhancements, where you've had a prior drug felony that is now no longer a prior drug felony for purposes of 851. And we're seeing those sentences being reevaluated.
I want to mention one thing just because we're being asked, this is really triage for us. We're trying to get as many people out of harm's way who are threatened by COVID. And I do think that there are definitely those cases about unfairness. People who had the 924C cases stacked, and you're seeing a lot of those people get out. I should be clear to the folks who are coming to FAM that we're not working on those right now. I mean, the clearinghouse could work on those at some future time, but all hands are decked for those who are medically vulnerable. So that's basically who we're focused on. I just want to be clear in case people reach out to us or fill out a questionnaire that bandwidth-wise, that's our priority. Somebody asked a question, he said, is it possible to have a public defender and a pro bono lawyer? And I think there's some confusion about this because we said we're going to try to match people with pro bono attorneys. And then I think they thought that it was always going to be a private attorney who took on the case for free. And I'm sorry if there is confusion about that. All that means is we're going to find everybody a free attorney. And in some cases, that is going to be the federal defender's office. they have really risen to the occasion, agreed to take on a lot of these cases. And so, you know, there's no need to have two. If you can afford an attorney and you want to pursue someone separately, that all the power to you. That will leave us more room to use that attorney for somebody else, frankly. So, but you wouldn't need two, and there is overlap between those two, because if you have somebody working on your case for free, you're in better shape than most. So I just want to mention that. And somebody asked a question about PRR, prison reentry release. I think that that's a Florida specific question, so that's probably not relevant to federal compassionate release. PRR is a terrible, terrible state, Florida state issue. I got a question for Damien. Were you quarantined for 14 days?
Yes, sir. I'll get off tomorrow.
But you were.
Quarantine is up tomorrow. I was supposed to quarantine at home for 14 days.
Were people quarantining at Fort Worth?
They had stopped him. They said they had one guy I know they made him stay 14 days before they released him. But the quarantining, there's no quarantine in there because it's just so packed in together.
I've been hearing horror stories about, I don't know if this is right, setting up like tents outside.
Yeah, they brought the military cots in there. And I mean, how can you quarantine somebody like an arm length away from you?
Yeah. And the other thing, and I know this is going to sound trivial to some people, but not to me, because I was only in prison for a year and a half, but like the important thing was getting sleep and getting food.
Right.
And what I am seeing and hearing from the families is the food is getting worse.
Horrible.
What's going on? Like, I mean, it got worse, yes?
Yes, sir, it did. Man, I can't explain it. I wasn't eating it. I was eating out my locker. Well, off the commissary.
Well, was commissary still open?
Yeah, it was. They had limited us to like $50.
Yeah. And what about like phone calls and emails and stuff? Because I thought people were under lockdown.
Yeah. See, in this facility, certain facilities, there's no locks on the door, so we were still able to use the phone. But in certain spots, you couldn't go use the computer no more. They had locked access to the computer.
Yeah. I don't know who will have an answer to this, and maybe Damien, you'll have seen some of this in your experience. People are asking, what are the federal prisons going to do if the majority of prison employees are sick with COVID and can't work? I mean, were you seeing, Damien, people, COs not come to work because they had tested positive or were nervous about it?
Yeah, they had plenty didn't come to work. We just assumed they was positive, but they only confirmed one case there for work.
Well, and what we've been hearing is they've been saying that it hasn't affected operations, but did you see otherwise? Like, I mean, was it enough people out that it led to like disruption and sort of, you know, I mean, either patrols or how much you were allowed to be out or do stuff? Because it seems like where I was, if you missed, if a few guards were missing, that would have been enough to throw things off. But I don't, how about you?
No, sir. They have them working like triple hours there. I think it's something like 16 hours a day now. So a lot of them pulling triples and double shifts.
And how were they? Because, you know, a lot of times there's an us versus them mentality. But, you know, between the guys inside and the guards. But I was wondering, you know, this is something I would think everybody's worried about getting this. I mean, these guys don't want to get it and bring it home to their families. But what was their attitude generally about it? Like, were they becoming angrier or like taking it out on you all, or were they worried about it and thought this was a disaster?
I just stayed out of the way. I stayed in my room. So I wasn't trying to go out and be in front of nobody because they didn't supply me with a proper mask. I felt they had me with a surgical mask, and the nurse told me that I can stop from giving it to people, but I can still get it maybe.
Yeah. Mario, what is, you know, what's something, you know, that I haven't asked that, you know, you'd want somebody to know about the process? I mean, I have some concern that, like I said, I think we were worried that if Congress and the president didn't use their authority to get people out, the courts were going to be the last hope. On the other hand, judges are not going to let everybody out. So, how do you see this process going? I mean, what do you think is likely to happen? Or you think judges are stepping up to the plate and taking this? I mean, are they? Because I know the Bureau of Prisons is saying we've got this handled. These people are fine where they are because these prisons are so well run and people are safe. And yet, every day it's coming out that the infection rates are rising. There's deaths. What do you? What is your take on that?
Well, what I can tell you, and I'm working on about almost 60 of these cases right now, that when we're filing motions or we're filing responses, the courts are turning them around quite quickly. So I know they're taking these very seriously. They're not just putting these off because they're a lower priority. My experience with our district and with other judges in different districts are they take every motion seriously, every request seriously. What I would tell people, if they're going to file something pro se or on their own, is to write clearly, legibly, list every fact and every reason why they think they qualify, and ask for an attorney. Our district is appointing counsel to every compassionate release case that shows any merit. And while someone, and Damien obviously did a great job on his pro se motion, others may not be as knowledgeable or skillful with the pen. So certainly ask for an attorney, ask the court to appoint an attorney, let them know you're indigent, and see where the court takes it from there.
That's a good point, because I have given advice to people, not legal advice, because we don't do that, but people have asked, they want to just write to the judge and when we say write to the warden and request compassionate release, they said, oh yeah, I wrote to the judge too. And I thought, I know what happened in the Fair Sentencing Act passed, the First Step Act passed, and they were doing the crack retroactivity motions, that sometimes people were writing from some of the guys inside were writing to the judges, and the judges were treating those as motions and denying them. And so I was worried that if people reached out to the courts, they wouldn't. But the more I've heard is consistent with what you're saying, which is in a lot of cases, the judges are appointing counsel. But you've made a different point too, which is to ask them to appoint counsel. I think that's an important thing. And the reason I want to say that too is because, FAM, just yesterday, we passed 600 placements of, the requests we've gotten. We've got 600 folks out to attorneys to review those cases. Some of the motions are being filed and the rest. We've got a huge stack still to get through, and then some that we're not going to be able to do. But I know some people are going to get nervous about time, and they're thinking, I don't, they see the positive numbers rising and they think I got to act on my own. And while we strongly recommend having an attorney, if you get to the point where, we're slowing you down, our view is go. But I think then in that context, that is good advice to say, ask the court to appoint an attorney, because you're likely to have them appoint the local defenders anyway, and that would be good.
Yeah.
I got a question here. Lack of testing. Damien, were you aware whether the COs were being tested for COVID at the prison, or was it, or were they just self-reporting that they didn't feel good or that they'd been exposed to it? Do you know what the testing was going on?
Oh, no, actually, I don't. All they said, they were just taking the temperatures when they come in. That was basically it. And
so you didn't get an official, did you ever get an actual COVID test? Like, did they do the swab or something like that?
Yeah, in my nose.
Yeah.
Like I said, I had took one before I came home. It was that same week, actually. And
Okay.
They came in 24 hours and did everybody again.
Okay. I think that's one thing that people are seeing the numbers rise, and that's concerning, but they should also realize that that's because they're finally testing, and we do need to know what the population test rates are. And so in some ways, hearing more positives is not good news, but it's at least we know. I'm more concerned about states like Mississippi and Arizona, where they're not testing people, and so we don't know how pervasive the problem is and whether there should be more treatment going on. Okay, if we can't afford an attorney to file for a loved one, how do we do this for them? What if the judge has died? Okay, well, so there's a couple different questions there. They can't afford an attorney. Well, that's why we have our clearinghouse operating. So go to fam.org, fam.org, and then you will see a link to the COVID resources page. And there you will see the questionnaire to fill out. It will ask you about your loved one's name, their information. Let me ask this, because I know this issue is coming up. Damien, did you have to get your medical records to proceed, or did they pull those for you because the warden was on your side? How did you get your medical records?
Well, they actually pulled them from me. The social worker there, she had pulled all of them up for me, but they didn't give me all of them at one point in time. It was piece by piece, and I had one crucial piece of information that would have probably released me before the COVID from my lungs. It was an X-ray of my lungs, and it showed me that it had deteriorated, my lungs got bigger.
Well, I know this has been an issue for others, Mario. Like, you mentioned that having an agreement, is that what you were saying before, that having an agreement with the U.S. attorney to get those, because other times families are fighting. I know that FAM's general counsel has reached out to the Bureau of Prisons and said, stop fighting us on these. What are you seeing in your experience?
Yeah, so what I'm telling my clients to do in the very beginning is request a cop-out. Go to your unit team, go to medical, request your medical records, request your progress reports, and send those to me, send those to your family. I'm asking for copies of pre-sentence investigation reports, because a lot of times those will establish some of the medical needs or criteria that an individual may have. I'm also asking for private medical records. If someone's only been in prison a couple of years, they probably have a history of medical records somewhere outside that the family can get to much quicker. So those are kind of some of the ways that I'm trying to track those down.
Somebody asked about, where does the case go? So when you file for compassion release, where do you file? And does it go back before the same judge that sentenced you? What's the process?
Yeah, so it's filed. You would want to file it under your criminal docket number, your CR number, and it goes back to the judge who originally sentenced you. They're probably going to be most familiar with you anyway. If in the event your judge has passed away or retired, which we've had a number of retirements here in our district, then it'll be reassigned automatically by the clerk to a new judge.
And I want to talk about home confinement, because that's been brought up. What have you seen? I think, Damien, you said you weren't seeing people get cleared for home confinement, right?
No, sir.
Yeah.
Not
And,
at all.
and Mario, you in pursuing compassion release, have you seen people that you may have been working with now then get considered for home confinement?
Yeah, a couple things there. One, again, when I first get the case, if it appears that they're under 12 months and might be considered for home detention, I'm firing off a letter establishing the bar criteria, Attorney General Barr's memo from late March, where he was encouraging facilities to review individuals very quickly for release.
Who are you sending that letter to?
To the counselor and the case manager at the facility.
Okay.
And then, and we've gotten a couple just quickly released that way. They've put them into 14-day quarantine and they're already out. So that's one way. The second way is, what was the question? I forgot.
Just that. I mean, have you seen people getting home confinement? And it sounds like by pursuing compassion release, you may be like loosening that up a little bit.
Yeah. So then the other thing is some districts, and it varies, think they can, the judges can place someone on home detention. Some districts are doing time served into making home detention a condition of their supervised release. So far, our judges have not taken the position that home detention is an option. It's either terminate the sentence and reduce it to time served or not.
But what do you think is, I mean, do you think they have a middle ground? Because we've been talking about Congress is, passing these COVID relief bills, and we've been talking about whether we needed to try to create some authority for judges to send people, right now the warden can send people to furloughs. Judges don't seem to have middle ground here. I mean, compassion release, you shorten the sentence. What do you say?
Well, I would quote a filing by the U.S. Attorney's Office that I saw recently outside of our district, where they said, of course, judges have nearly unlimited power to issue orders. Certainly, home detention could be an additional term of supervised release if there's that concern that someone needs to be confined to their home for a period of time once they're released. I don't know where that's going, and maybe some of the appellate courts will tell us, but certainly it seems like the judges should have the authority to have a number of different options available.
Yeah, well, it seems right. They can shorten the sentence, but still require monitoring. The question is, can they do something that's almost in between? You know, it just seems like it's a fair question because some of these people are compromised, and you want to spare them from this disease, but they may have 10 or 15 years left. And if Barr doesn't get to them with home confinement, the only option for a judge is to cut their sentence to, you know, so it is a little bit of a sticky situation. My attorney needs a consent for him to provide legal services, but we cannot get a hold of my husband. I know this is an issue because people have been stuck in the hole or they're in transfer, places. He got transferred to USP from the low, and he has not contacted us. How do we get his consent? For legal help.
Yeah, that's a tough one because that's one of the practical problems we're running into is these facilities are shutting down all communication. They're not even letting individuals out for 10 or 20 minutes like they were before to make a phone call or to use email. The best thing I can tell you is, for 50 some cents, you can write a letter. It may not get there tomorrow or the next day, but it'll get there, and try and get consent from your loved one. Also, ask the attorney for reconsideration. What other things can they provide to allow the attorney to go ahead and move forward? I mean, there's a practical solution. It's not always a black and white situation.
Are people entitled to have legal calls? I mean, even in this shutdown, does that stop you from calling a client?
No, and so if I face that situation, what I might do is file a motion with the court and document how long it's been since I've been able to communicate my client or my client's family's been able to communicate them. A simple 2-page motion will get just as much attention as a 50-page motion with the judge, and lay out why it's a violation of the individual's rights to not have communication with counsel. This is an important, critical function and step in our process. So absolutely, if all other options fail, file a motion.
Everyone who's listening, make a note of that because he's a good lawyer and you will have a good lawyer too, most likely, but this can't be all on you. I mean, you can call the prison and say, I want to be in touch with my loved one for this purpose. It is different. They treat it different when a lawyer calls. I noticed that, some of these counselors and case managers, they don't respect attorney-client privilege that well. But if you, if you make the call, the lawyer makes the call, it can be different. I was asked a question by my friend Diane Cabrera, who asked about home confinement, and I had mentioned in a post a while back about different waves of criteria, and I got to say that events have sort of superseded that. What I meant by that was they established the criteria about 50%, about your low pattern score, about what institution you were in, about no violence, no disciplinary infractions the last 12 months. And those were all supposed to be discretionary, except for the institutional violations. But even the 50% one, there was the whole bait and switch problem we had where they said you didn't have to serve 50%, but then you did, and now you don't again, but they're still enforcing it. Now what I've learned from you all in the last couple of days is that they're really looking at folks who meet the CDC criteria. Whereas before, they seemed really focused on people who are at the end of their sentence, just to clear people out. And so that's why you saw Michael Cohen, the president's former attorney, and others in these camps being cleared out. Now they seem to have shifted gears and they're looking at people who meet the CDC criteria, which is older and maybe medically compromised. So it's hard for me to say what the wave is because the wave keeps taking different shapes every day. And so what I meant to say was, even if you didn't meet the 50% requirement, what the counselors were basically saying was, that's my first priority. So those were the people I was looking for first. It didn't mean that if you hadn't served 50%, you wouldn't be eligible. It just meant if you're making a priority list, you're going to go with the people that served more of their sentence and met the other criteria. But like I said, I think that's already shifted. And I think they have moved to older people who have medical conditions. And so the 50% seems to have come back and now they are telling people. But I've also had people, thanks to you all, have told me that they've cleared them and then reviewed their record and found a violent incident from 15 years ago and use that to ding people. So what worries me is that they are using those criteria as a sword to ding people. They're trying to find the one thing you don't meet and knock you off, as opposed to looking at you holistically through those criteria and figure out who should be moved out of harm's way. So because it changes every day, I can't give you great guidance on what they're doing. And I also think it varies from institution to institution. And we already know that if you're in a low or a camp, you're a higher priority. And so that concerns me. It's the other reason we wanted to do compassionate release, is because there are medically vulnerable people at mediums and highs who shouldn't be killed by this disease, but they're not even going to be considered, I think, under the Barr memo. So I'm sorry that it's confusing, and I add to it when I try to give some guidance, but it's because the Bureau keeps changing its priorities every day, it seems. Is there anything you want to add to that, either of you? Okay, I'll do another one. Mr. Garcia, for the PSR, my loved one is being told that isn't something he can receive. He was told that he could view it, but not, yes, he couldn't get a copy of it. I've checked on Pacer and you're not able to locate it. Well, that is true. They don't allow you to have your PSR. I know that because they don't want other people looking at your PSR, because in prison, that's, Damien knows, they want to figure out who the snitches are. So,
Yeah.
so there's a reason why people can't have their PSR. So what can he do, Damien? I mean, Mario.
Yeah, so what our district's done is, as soon as there's an appointment, the clerk frees up the restricted access to that pre-sentence report for the attorney. That's another reason why having an attorney involved in the case is just going to get you more access to information quicker. So I'm able to pull up a pre-sentence report for a client that was not my client before, is now, and quickly access that report for any help.
Okay. What about, what if the person family member has power of attorney, legal power of attorney? Does that help them get around the issue of consent if they can't get in touch with their loved one?
Yeah, certainly not providing legal advice here, but my thought would be yes. If there is a signed power of attorney that is presented to legal counsel, that certainly would be something that I would take as a valid consent.
Well, and this person says the lawyer can't even get in touch with the person inside, and this, again, we're so much better advocates for hearing these, what's happening, and that may be something that FAM will have to address with BOP headquarters and general counsel, and say we're seeing this arise where we can't get in touch with people. Now that's a problem all the time, but it seems a particular problem when you have these shutdowns. And now some of these facilities, I know Terminal Island and others, where they're shut down for 3 weeks, no phones, no email, or all the rest. So anyway.
File a motion.
Yeah, file a motion. Okay, when filing for compassionate release with the sentencing court, how much influence does the original prosecution team have over the outcome? Judge's decision, can that protest stop the release or possible home confinement? So, I guess if the original prosecutor is still on the case, they're going to be asked to weigh in, right? So how does that go?
Yeah, this is another one of those, waves that's shifting. So initially, all of our compassionate release cases here were being assigned to line assistant U.S. attorneys on the civil side, and they were taking them up. But they became inundated with them and quickly realized they should go back to the originally assigned criminal attorney. So regardless, yes, the U.S. attorney has say in whether to oppose or not a release for compassionate reasons. But you also might have an attorney who is familiar with the case, knows that this individual spent 15 years in prison, looks at their pack and thinks, they've rehabilitated as best they can, and maybe there is a sufficient reason to let them out. So well, I'm not optimistic that that's going to happen. Haven't seen in our district consent yet, but I have seen in others where the U.S. attorney has consented.
Yeah, and the alternative is when this process is just in the Justice Department hands, those prosecutors act as a total veto. Whereas at least when you get in front of a judge, you see judges listening to the prosecutors make the case about what a terrible, horrible, no good person this is, but they're still saying, making a different call. And so I think you shouldn't let that be too much of a deterrent. It's the only chance you have is to get in front of somebody independent. And I think you've even seen judges who have sentenced people pretty harshly, but 4 or 5 years later, if their medical condition has worsened and the risk of COVID, and they see some of these places like Butner and other places where the Bureau has no handle on the spread, I think they're being a little bit more compassionate and thoughtful. We are about out of time. So at this time, usually what I do is I just ask each of you to any closing remarks you may have. I'm going to start with Damien. I just want to say, one, you're a trooper for doing this for us, because I know you probably have other things you want to do and you just got home. But thank you. Just know that everybody is really excited for you to be home. And what can you say to the families and others who want to have their loved ones be in the position you're in?
I mean, just pray and try and do what you can to get them out. I mean, that's all we can do. Like you said, it's limited now up in there, and no one's able to actually get in contact with the person that they need to, or sign these consents for these lawyers. So, I mean, you just have to stay with it.
Yeah.
But I definitely want to thank the FAM staff, though.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, we're glad to help. It's nice to have some successes, and I hope we get more folks out. And Mario, how about? Oh, and wait a minute. And thank you, Vanessa.
Oh, sure.
Welcome.
Everybody needs a Vanessa. That's what we always tell everybody. The best chance is a family member who fights for him,
Yes,
and a lawyer. So Mario, that means you.
Yeah. Just remember, it's not just showing that there's a medical condition or an important situation that the individual is facing in the facility that's extraordinary. You also have to have a reentry plan. You also have to have those 3553A factors laid out for the judge. So don't forget those two key points too, if you're going to be filing something with the court.
Okay. Well, thank you both. I mean, I hope this was helpful for the folks. As I always say, if you had questions that we didn't answer, or you watch this later because you're working or doing something else, post your questions below the video and our staff will try to make sure we answer all of those. And if you need to reach out to Mario, we'll help facilitate that. Although we can't represent everybody because he's in Indianapolis and those are the only cases he can handle. But we'll get any questions to him that you may have. I just want to, again, thank everybody for all the information they're sharing with us. I know this is a trying time. I know you want to get your loved ones out as quickly as possible. Know that we are working as hard as we can to get as many of you processed and get into the hands of qualified attorneys who can help you navigate the system in the way these folks just described. So be patient, but also know that if you're getting nervous and scared because of this situation and you want to proceed on your own, we understand that as well. So just do what's best for your family. We're not going to tell you how to proceed, but just know that we're doing everything we can to get those of you who we think are even close to eligible, matched with attorneys. So with that, we'll end it. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Oh, here's our advertisement for next week's Heart to Heart series. I'm going to have Van Jones from the Reform Alliance, and most of you probably know him more from CNN. And then Sean Hopwood, who is a member of FAM's board and more famous for the 60 Minutes profile. Sean was convicted of robbing 5 banks in Nebraska when he was a young, unruly 20-year-old. And now he became a jailhouse lawyer and then went to law school and now is a professor at Georgetown. And he's a phenomenal advocate. He puts a lot of time into this, as does Van. So I'm excited that they'll be joining us next week. Thanks again to Damien and Mario. Thanks to our team for doing this, and we'll see everybody soon.